What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to talk about where to put your emergency fund. Now if you're working on saving an emergency fund and you want some tips on how to save up an emergency fund faster, I already have a video on that, so I'll link it up here. But today we're talking about where do you actually put that money that you're saving in your emergency fund. So I'll give you my 3 favorite places that I like to keep an emergency fund, and I'll tell you the pros and cons of each. The first place you can keep an emergency fund is just in your regular checking account with all of your other money that you're using to pay bills. Now the pro about keeping your emergency fund in your checking account is that it's super accessible if there's an emergency. An emergency fund should be used for actual emergencies, so it's not always going to be something that you need the money immediately, but you'll probably need it pretty quickly if something comes up. Like your car breaks down and you need to go get it repaired today, it would be helpful to have access to that money right away so you can pay for the car repair and be on your way. The other nice thing about having an emergency fund, or at least a portion of your emergency fund in your checking account, is it serves as a cushion for all of your bills. So let's say you have $5,000 of bills and $5,000 of income, but you also have a $5,000 emergency fund that you keep in your checking account. Well, as your bills come up throughout the month, you don't need to worry at what point in the month you're getting paid and if you have enough money in your account for those bills, because at the beginning of the month, you've already got $5,000 in there that will cover all of the bills that you need in your emergency fund. Now the con to having your emergency fund in your checking account is the same as one of the pros actually. It is very accessible. So you may accidentally spend this money, you have easier access to it. It takes more self-control to make sure that money stays in your checking account for emergencies only and doesn't accidentally get spent elsewhere, or you're not tempted to use that money for things you want or impulse purchases because you see the money's in the account and so you kind of forget that it's for emergencies and you decide, it's okay, I'll just take, a little bit off and that won't be noticeable. I'll still have plenty in there for emergencies, and before you know it, you've spent half your emergency fund. My second favorite place to keep an emergency fund is in a regular savings account at the same bank that you do your checking and regular bills at. The pro to keeping your emergency fund in a savings account at the same bank as your checking account is it's still super easily accessible, but it's not in the same account that you use all the time for paying bills and general spending. So it's not so tempting just having the money sitting right there. But if you needed it in an emergency, most people have online banking, so you could just go on your phone and make a transfer from your savings to your checking and pay a bill right away for any sort of emergency that came up. However, the con to having your emergency fund in a savings account at a regular bank is regular banks give very, very little interest for their savings accounts. And I guess that's another con for a checking account too, unless you have like an online bank where you do your checking and they give some sort of interest on your checking account. But for a typical savings account at like a regular brick and mortar bank, you're barely getting any interest at all. Like it's almost not even worth having a separate savings account. You're basically getting nothing on your money. So if you're gonna keep your emergency fund or part of your emergency fund in a savings account, it's good to have it separate so you don't accidentally spend it, but you're not really gonna be able to benefit from any growth on that money because it's in an account that's barely getting any interest. Now, you don't want to invest your emergency fund. You want it to be accessible. You're not trying to grow this money greatly, but if you can put it in an account in a safe way where it's not going to lose money and you're going to gain a little bit more interest than a typical savings account, then that's not a bad idea either. So that brings me to my third favorite place to keep an emergency fund, and that is a high yield savings account. Most high yield savings accounts are available through online banks, and so that's what we do for part of our emergency fund. We have it in a high yield savings account. Right now, our high yield savings account gives 0.5% interest, I think it is. So it's not anything crazy when we could get like 10, 15, maybe even 20% returns if the money was invested in the stock market. But again, it's an emergency fund. We don't want to put this money in any sort of risky account where it can lose money or where it's going to be locked up if we can't access it for an emergency. So an emergency fund is not meant to be invested, and if we can get a little bit more than we would at our regular bank for interest on the emergency fund that we have in a savings account, then that's great. So that's why I really like a high yield savings account for at least a portion of your emergency fund. High yield savings accounts like I said, they're typically online, have online banks, and there's a variety of high yield savings accounts. They generally pay around the same interest rate. They're pretty competitive with each other. Maybe one's a little bit more or less, but again, this is not a money-making venture or emergency fund. This is just like a place to park money in case of an emergency, and if we can make a little money on it, great, but it's not the biggest deal in the world because we don't have like you know, tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars that's going to build up in these accounts. So I'll link a couple different high yield savings accounts, different banks that have them, in the description for this video if you want to check them out. I know there's a few that are popular among like the personal finance community. I would recommend you do your own research and decide which one makes the most sense for you if you're going to go that route. The downside for a high yield savings account is typically it's not going to be at the same bank as you do your normal banking. So if you need to access that money, it might take a day or more to transfer it. Again, it just depends where you do your banking and other factors, but you may not have access to it immediately. And so if you're using a high yield savings account, you might want to do what we do and only put a portion of your emergency fund in that account. So overall, where do we keep our emergency fund? We split it 50-50. Half of our emergency fund is in our checking account. And that's because we have been on a debt-free journey for over 2 years. We've gotten really disciplined with all of our money and we don't overspend at this point. We pretty much stay on track month to month with all of our budgeting and all of our different spending. But I do like having that cushion in my checking account. So at the beginning of the month, we have all the money we need to cover all of our bills for the month. And I don't need to worry what time of the month different paychecks are coming in. I just, you know, the paychecks come in the beginning of the month, the middle of the month, the end, and it doesn't matter when the bills are due and when the paychecks come in. I don't have to figure all that out. I'm very happy that we're at that place. We're very fortunate to be at a place where we have enough money in our checking account the first of the month to pay for everything we need to for the month. And we weren't always there. For a long time, we didn't have an emergency fund, and then it hovered around $2,000 to $3,000, and now we have $10,000 in our checking account, and that is just half of our emergency fund. Our total emergency fund is $20,000, and the other half, the other $10,000, is in a high yield savings account. So that is it for today's video. I hope you guys found this helpful. Where do you guys keep your emergency fund? Do you keep it in your checking account? Do you keep it in a savings account, high yield savings account, some other place that I didn't mention? Comment below and let me know. I want to hear where you guys keep your money. If you like this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up. It really helps on my channel. And if you want to see more videos like this from me, then hit that red subscribe button down there. I'd love to have you as a subscriber, and I'll see you guys soon in my next video. Bye.